All right, today we're going to go ahead and talk about a bit about what love has to do with lowering entropy. Okay, how is it that entropy and love are connected somehow? All right, so we know that in this virtual reality paradigm that we described, the larger consciousness system is the fundamental system. As avatars, being played by, let's say, players, consciousness, an individuated unit of consciousness, that's the player, and that our virtual reality is essentially a learning lab, an incubator, and it is within a larger consciousness system, and that is an information system, a digital binary information system. Now, digital information systems want or need or exist because they have information. And an information system evolved because it's evolving toward more or better or more useful information. It's the increase in information, how it evolves. All right. If it loses information or decreases in information, then it's de-evolving. All right. So let's take a look at entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder. So think of an information system and how that applies to disorder. Well, information is order. If you have bits of information and it's all random, then there's no information. There's no information in randomness. That's almost quintessentially the definition. No information in randomness. So if all the bits are random, then you really don't have an information system. You have a potential for an information system, but there is no information. Now, as you order these bits, that order has meaning. It could just be patterns. Any order. Any order contains information. Here's an example. Up, down, up, down, up. What's next? Down. Because there's a pattern. Okay. And when you establish that pattern, that's information. You can predict what is next because of the information that you had prior to the missing segment. Now, it's lower entropy than if it were all random. Okay. So that information, let's say, are symbols like 0 and a 1, on, off, off, on. It's able then to set up sequences, on, off, off, on, and so forth. It sets up patterns which define certain procedures. All right. Now, an information a system that loses information is devolving. So it can have two choices: grow, evolve, or it can de-evolve and have less information, less significance, and essentially, after a while, if that continues, then we would call it death. So if you were an aware information system, you would be trying to lower your entropy, trying to lower your disorder. So one of the things these systems do to create more opportunity is the larger system broke itself into pieces so it could interact with free will with the separate individualized segments of information or consciousness. This created a lot of new possibilities of interaction with other free will units. Who knows what they might do? They have free will. How they might interact, how they might choose to or not choose to is unknown. That creates a lot more potential for growth, a bigger potential for order. It's a strategy, a methodology to help the system to grow, more places to expand into, more degrees of freedom from which it can organize itself. Now in biology, the same thing occurred. It became more survivable as it became more flexible. And they become more flexible as it becomes more complex. Let's take a single cell. As it evolved into multi-cell, it lowered its entropy because it's more complex, more order, more structure, more opportunities of growth and evolution. So evolution in biology is also based on entropy. The lower the entropy, which is defined relative to a system, the more you evolve. The more complexity you have, the more capability you have, the more flexibility you have, the more you can do, the more you can understand, comprehend, the more choices, the more degrees of freedom that you have. So the larger consciousness system, which created the universe and broke itself into billions and zillions and Googles of information to interact with itself. That's a social system interacting with itself. Now, in this interaction, there, let's say, within an example, there can be two different paths, okay? Let's say it turns out that the path which lowers entropy would be one system. All right, so we're talking about a social system, which is a bunch of free-willed units of consciousness which interact with one another. Now, in this interaction, there are ways in which they can lower their entropy and ways in which they could raise it. Two different paths you can go. Now, as it turns out, the path which lowers entropy, let's say there's a group one that cooperates and works together and focuses on how they can be of service as opposed to what they can get. Let's imagine two sets in the experiment. And we're going to see the difference between these two sets. The first, let's say there's 100,000 units of consciousness, and that'll be set one. And then set two, you have a certain amount of resources, a certain amount of capability, a certain amount of space, and then this other is, of course, the exact same amount of capabilities, space, resources. It's exactly the same, except you're going to have two different attitudes in the separate sets. In the first attitude, we're going to have a cooperative, caring. All right. In this set, if someone invents something or comes up with a great idea, they share it with everyone else. If someone's unhappy about what's going on, then everybody comes together and try to rearrange things to make its life or its circumstances happier. So it's about other, primarily. And let this set, let it evolve, let it go, let it run, okay? We'll come back and look at it, let's say 100,000 years later, and see what we have that evolved there. So let's take a look at this set. And instead of love-based like this set, it's going to be fear-based. All right? And when you have fear, you don't have trust. You're afraid that everyone else is going to take advantage of you, so you trust no one. And it's all about getting your needs met because you're self-centered. Fear is very self-centered. It's, if you're fearful, it's all about you. It's the nature of fear, fearful that makes it all about oneself. So this set, the fearful set, won't have trust. They'll each try to get as much of the resources as they possibly can. Then they'll have to hold on to them as best they can because they're thinking someone else may try to take it away from them. So they quickly learn that if they group up, they become a little bit more powerful. So let's say 10 of those fearful beings together as a pack, as a gang, they're more powerful. Now they can go around and start taking away from the doubles or the singles or the quadruples because they can overpower them and take those resources that they need. So after a while, there's a group that has 20 or 30. And what happens is that as this continues, these competing groups form. And in these competing groups, each one is trying to get as much of the resources as possible as they can possibly manage. Or not even manage, just acquire. Because neither trusts anyone. Leadership is always being done in, and people are falling, and others are rising to the top. It's always chaotic, and there's always turmoil. Eventually, at the end of that 100 or 1,000 years, you would have a probably 5% of the beings in the fear-based group in control of 95% of all the resources, and everyone else is somewhat of a peasant or a slave or a drone. And the others in the oligarchy would be thriving. And you would have very little trust, and everyone would be out for themselves, kind of dog eat dog, similar to our world. This is kind of how that is in this physical, objective reality. So we know how that turns out. Now, over on this other side, where people cooperate, there is no need for them to make these gangs, the grouping up for protection. There's no need for expending energy to grab as much as you can because you're fearful you won't have enough. There's not a great deal for the governance to be established to protect or control, or to have a management control. You wouldn't have ever management saying, you go do this, crank this, dig that hole, sweat and toil. It wouldn't be in the best interest of that person. So you wouldn't have any say in that. So, because in that society, you would want every individual unit to fulfill its potential. That's what makes them happy. So you would have lots of personal freedoms to do what you want, how you want, when you want, because if you didn't and you were unhappy, the rest of the units would be trying to find a way to make your life happier. And they would develop a means to accommodate you. But we can't do that easily because we live in a very fearful place. We say, well, there's certain jobs that need to be done and nobody wants to do it, so we've got to force them to do it. That's dysfunctional. There are jobs that need to be done, and if everybody sees they need to be done, then there would be people that would do them, and if there's jobs that are unpleasant, then they would be particularly high-paying jobs. Because when you do things that are unpleasant, then you get, or should get, more reward for that. So there's a way to make hard jobs or not nice jobs sweeter. You compensate the individual, or the respect that you have for doing those dirty jobs no one else wants to do, taking out the sewage or what have you. Those would actually, in that love-based society, be a prestigious job because it's doing something that no one else wants to do. It'd be a different type of structure, a different paradigm, and everything would be done in a way that works for all. Now, at the end of their 100 years, they would have optimized the value for every individual to the greatest extent possible. And you would have a place that is a wonderful place to exist, to live, work, love, play, raise a family. We know what the other system is like because we live there. It's full of greed and nastiness and everyone trying to control everyone else. That's how that works out, like our system. Now, the one that is ordered, loving, and caring, that's the low entropy solution to a social system. That's what entropy has to do with love. We are, as consciousness, pieces of a social system, and the way in which we lower our entropy is by becoming love, caring about others, being compassionate, having empathy. That's how you optimize a social system. That's how you optimize consciousness. That's how you create information choice, freedom, opportunities, flexibility, all very constructive. On the other side, well, it's just like us. Everything is suboptimal. Everyone is working beneath their potential. They could do more, they could be more, but they can't because they're stuck in a hierarchy, in a position, peasantry, or what have you. Most are not doing well or as well as those who are. Large divide. So entropy and love is connected. Now that we are aware that entropy and love are intrinsically connected, we're now able to connect the reality that, as we learned in our previous session, that love is itself an actual dimension. We're now able to appreciate the connection of the dots that in emotion, E representing energy being expended, or the energetic action of motion toward the optimizing of our response ability to successfully effectuate the uplifting of fallen humanity. Remembering that it is us who have been created as co-creators to accept the required assigned task of resetting the trajectory of that event back to its appropriate destiny, the uplifting of fallen humanity, the consciousness shift forward in our evolution. So now we'll move on to some of the things that you can do with your consciousness. Some things which you may not know you can do with your consciousness. You see, in this virtual reality, we are actual co-creators of this reality. We co-create in many ways. One is in the way we interpret things. Something happens and we have an interpretation of what happened. Someone else sees the same thing and they have a different interpretation of what happened. That means everyone exists in their own personal reality based upon your interpretation of that reality. So that's one way that you create your own reality, through interpretation. Another way is through your interaction. For example, if you're a user, people hard to get along, mean-spirited, what you create is a world where people will try to avoid you. You won't be liked, you won't be invited, you won't be welcome because you're not a nice person. You create that reality because of your choices, your actions. So that's another way that you create your reality. And a third way is the way in which virtual reality operates. Your intent modifies future probability, what is likely to happen in the future. Your intent can make it more likely or less likely. You have that ability to modify future probability. Now, one of the ways this happens, all of us have heard of it, it's called the placebo effect. If you tell someone that they're taking a wonderful new medicine that will fix what's going on, just by doing that and nothing else, just by telling them that, giving them a salt pill or sugar pill or something that has no medicine in it at all, will make a difference based upon their attitude. And there's been countless studies proving this to be so, using control groups. This is scientific. Just give them a pill and go swallow that and see what happens. And based upon their attitude and intent, positive attitude, their health will be better. It's called the placebo effect. Look it up. It's a real effect. It's not just that those people with a positive outlook think they are healthier. They really are healthier. This is a real biological thing. It actually helps to move the probability for better health higher and the probability for lower health, for worse health, lower. Okay? Now you can use your mind with this intent to change health or most anything else that's probable. But because we're talking about probability, things that are, let's say, have a lot of uncertainty around them. It could go this way, it could go that way. It's not very certain how they're going to work out. Those are the things that are easier to affect with your mind because you can move within the realm of the natural uncertainty of the problem. So any problem, any issue, be it health or whether it's going to rain tomorrow, has a certain degree of probability whether it will happen. And if that probability has a fair amount of uncertainty in it, we're not really sure. We really don't know. 0.6 versus a 0.4 or a 5.2 versus a 4.8. There's a lot of uncertainty. So it's easier for you to effect with your intent. Now, if the probability is very strong, like 100,000 to 1 that something is going to happen, well, you can use your intent, but it's not going to make a great deal of difference. Maybe you'll just change it to 2 to 100,000, It's changed, but not significantly. So you can't change anything the way you wish, but you can modify. Okay? But how do you do it? With intent. But intent is not effective unless it's more than simply intellectual. That's just making a wish. It's like throwing a penny in a wishing well and say, I wish for, a new whatever. That's not very powerful. The intent has to come from the core being level, the center of your being. It has to have power, not simply a wish. The power is relative to the connection, investment to the event you're desiring. Yes, you can heal yourself as well as others. Yes, you can hurt yourself as well as others. Intent simply changes probability. You can use this in many ways, but it's an interesting fact to know that you have 3 ways in which you can change your reality. 1, you get to interpret things. And if you interpret everything as miserable and unhappy and, Debbie Downer and just a complainer and that everything is dark, your life will be full of misery, unhappiness, and things won't work out. But if you look at the same things and you see the positive side, you will tend to be a more satisfied, more fulfilled individual. That's your choice, how you wish to view things. And you also have to learn that however you make those choices, they're your choices. You can't say, oh, that person made me angry, so-and-so did something that makes me angry. Don't blame your anger on someone else. If that person makes you angry, that's not what's going on. That person does something and you choose or were unable to control yourself relative to your choices. You have other options. You don't have to be angry. There are other choices in responding. But if you have too much ego or too much fear, too many beliefs, you'll tend to just get angry. That's what happens. If you get rid of that fear, ego, and belief, you have a lot more choices that have nothing to do with anger, constructive choices. That's why getting rid of the fear, belief systems, that anger dissipates. It will improve all of your relationships with everything in your life. So we get to make our reality partially, because other people also have free will, and you are affected by their choices as well. So you can't control everything, only part of it. But that part of it that you can control is pretty powerful. Once you learn how to focus your intent from the being level, empty your mind, get rid of all the noise, the chatter, the static. Meditation is one way. Have a clean, clear, powerful focus. There are methodologies by which one can achieve that. Okay. You can't force other people to have choices, and you can't force the rule set to be different than what it is. If I take something and I drop it, you can't simply have it float in the air necessarily, because you're trying to change the rules under which this particular program, for lack of a better word, operates. The functionality, the cause and effect, how this system operates. You can't just simply change the rule set easily. You can't just decide the way that things are going to happen, but you can change a great deal by growing up, getting rid of your fear, your ego, developing your being level, developing your love, teaching your children to love instead of hate, applying that to being helpful, cooperative, and your entire life will be a far more positive, very fulfilling existence. So, the bottom line is you do have some control over the reality that you live in. Actually, a great deal. But the biggest contribution you can make to this reality is to change yourself. If you want to figure out how to change circumstances in this reality, is, as they often say, begin with oneself. Grow up. Get rid of your fears, your egos, and many of those negative belief systems. Your contribution, by you doing that, you will help a number of other people that you have contact with, as an example. And because we are all netted, every consciousness is part of that net, the hive mind, and how we think affects other people. It's a collective. We are all part of a greater whole.